After my husband passed away, my son didn't even wait for the mourning to end. He demanded all the properties and assets we had. Not satisfied, he threw me into a nursing home, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and my late husband's old watch on my wrist. With no money, my only option was to sell the last and dearest keepsake I had of him. I took the item to an appraiser, who examined it with a magnifying glass. Suddenly, he stopped, looked at me wide-eyed, and pulled me aside, saying, "Ma'am, this is not just a simple watch. My name is Helena. I am 73 years old, and a month ago, I discovered that grief has many layers. The first is the searing pain of loss, the physical absence of the one you loved for a lifetime. The second, more cruel and silent, is the pain of betrayal, which arrives like a thief in the night to steal not only your future, but the sanctity of your past as well. For 50 years, I was Robert's wife, my rock, the man who painted my world with the colors of security and affection. He took care of everything, from the bills to the investments, with a competence that I, in my blind trust, never questioned. My role, I believed, was to take care of our home, our son, our heart, and I did it with a loyalty that bordered on devotion. Today, sitting in this room that smells of disinfectant and loneliness, I see how that same loyalty was the very rope my own son used to lasso me and drag me into this abyss. The storm began a week after Robert's funeral. The house was still heavy with the scent of funeral wreaths and the profound silence of his absence. I was in the kitchen, trying to find the strength to make a cup of tea, when my son, Mark, walked in. He wasn't alone. His wife, Sylvia, followed him like a shadow, her eyes sweeping over every corner of the house, not with the sadness of one who had lost a father-in-law, but with the greed of a loan shark inspecting a property. Mark placed a leather briefcase on the table, the muffled sound profanely breaking the stillness. "Mom, we need to get the estate organized quickly," he said. His voice was devoid of any warmth, practical, efficient, like a stranger discussing a business deal. There was no, "How are you?" No hug, no moment of shared sorrow, just papers. A mountain of papers that he spread across the table, covering the faint rings our coffee cups had left over decades of breakfasts. I stared at the pages, but the letters danced before my tear-filled eyes. Legalese, clauses, paragraphs that my mind, shrouded in the fog of grief, couldn't decipher. "What is all this, son?" I whispered, my voice weak. "It's just a formality, Mom," he replied, impatience coloring his tone. "We're protecting the family's assets. Just sign here and here." Sylvia handed me a pen, her smile thin and cold, and I, in my weakness, in my desperate desire to believe that my son was taking care of me as his father always had, signed. I signed everything, every page he put in front of me, trusting my own flesh and blood, the boy I once held in my arms. With each signature, I felt as if I were giving away a piece of my life, not understanding that was exactly what I was doing. When they finally left, taking the leather briefcase and my future inside it, the house felt colder and emptier than ever. I clung to the one thing they didn't take, the one thing that still connected me to Robert. On my wrist, the familiar weight of his old gold watch, which I had taken from his arm before they closed the casket. The soft ticking was the only heartbeat left in that deafening silence, and I had no idea that sound was the countdown to the destruction of everything I had ever known. In the days that followed, the house that had been my sanctuary for 50 years began to transform into a prison of memories and foreboding. Mark and Sylvia became constant presences, but not in a comforting way. They moved through the rooms with an air of ownership, opening closets, whispering in corners, their gazes assessing the furniture, the paintings, the objects Robert and I had collected over a lifetime. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a relic of the past they navigated around with irritated patience. The first real blow, the first tangible proof that the signatures on those papers were not mere formalities, came in the form of a plastic card. I went to the local grocery store, a place where everyone knew me by name, to buy bread and milk. At the checkout, the bank card, the same one I had used for years for household expenses, was declined. Insufficient funds, the cashier told me, her face flushing with second-hand embarrassment. I didn't understand. Robert had always made sure there was more than enough in that account. I walked home, my shopping bag empty, the humiliation burning on my face. When I confronted Mark that evening, he barely looked up from his phone. Oh, right. I had to freeze the accounts. Mom, it's part of the probate process, to protect the assets. You know, don't worry. I'll take care of whatever you need. The phrase, "I'll take care of it," was beginning to sound less like a comfort and more like a threat. He handed me a few bills, as if I were a child asking for an allowance, and the matter was closed. The next day, a man I had never seen before was in my garden, hammering a "for sale" sign into the lawn that Robert had taken such pride in maintaining. The shock stole my breath. I ran outside, my heart pounding erratically. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man looked at me with pity. "Orders from the owner, ma'am, Mr. Mark. My son was selling my home, the home where he took his first steps, where we celebrated his birthdays, where I cherished every square inch of my husband's memory. The argument that followed was the first time I saw the mask of the concerned son fall away completely. When I questioned him, the coldness in his eyes turned to ice. "Mom, you can't afford to maintain a house this size. It's too big, too expensive. It's for your own good." And then Sylvia, who had been observing until then, intervened, her voice sickly sweet, poisonous. "Helena, dear, you're not thinking clearly. The grief has you confused. You need to be cared for, somewhere you don't have to worry about a thing." Every word was carefully chosen to undermine my sanity, to make me doubt myself. They were building a narrative, the senile old widow who no longer knew what was best for her. I felt myself shrinking, my voice growing smaller, my pain being used as a weapon against me. I retreated to my bedroom, the only space that still felt like mine, and I wept. I wept for the loss of my husband, for the cruelty of my son, and for the overwhelming terror of losing control of my own life. That night, Mark knocked on my door. He didn't come in. He just said, through the wood, "Mom, I've thought a lot about this situation. We found the perfect place for you, a safe place where you'll have all the assistance you need. We'll take you to see it tomorrow morning." The finality in his voice left no room for debate. I wasn't being invited. I was being informed, and a deep fear, colder than grief itself, settled in my heart. The next morning arrived with the punctuality of an executioner. There was no discussion, no appeal. Mark entered my room as the sun was just beginning to rise, his face a mask of cold determination. "It's time, Mom." The car ride was a silent funeral. I sat in the back, watching the streets of my town pass by the window, like a film of my life on fast forward. The bakery where we bought warm bread on Sundays, the park where Mark learned to ride his bike, the church where I married Robert. Every corner, a stab of memory. Mark and Sylvia, in the front seats, didn't say a word. Their silence was heavier and crueler than any shout. They weren't sharing a difficult transition. They were executing an unpleasant task. They were getting rid of a problem. The perfect place was not the sunny retreat with gardens and activities that the word suggested. It was a gray 3-story building wedged between a gas station and a vacant lot on the outskirts of town. A faded sign at the entrance read, "Golden Sunset Senior Living," an irony so bitter it made me swallow hard. As we entered, the smell hit me first. The scent of disinfectant fought a losing battle against the cloying, sad odor of confined old age. an aroma of loneliness and medication. Long, dimly lit hallways stretched out before us, lined with closed doors. We saw some of the other residents. A woman in a wheelchair staring blankly at a wall. A man shuffling in a torn slipper, his eyes empty. No one smiled. The life seemed to have been drained from the place, leaving only hollow shells. A stout woman in a starched white uniform and a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes greeted us. "Welcome. I'm Nurse Evans, the head nurse." Her friendliness was professional, distant. She led us to a small room that served as an office and began to explain the rules. That's when the final humiliation began. "You can keep your clothes and personal hygiene items," she said, looking at a clipboard. "But jewelry, cash, and valuables must be kept in the administration's safe. It's for everyone's security." My heart went cold. My hands instinctively went to my wrist, covering Robert's watch. It was all I had left. Sylvia's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, followed my movement. "What about the watch?" she asked, her voice falsely casual. A cold panic seized me. They were going to take this from me, too. But Mark, with a dismissive wave, intervened. "She can keep the watch." He looked at Nurse Evans with an air of condescension. "It's just an old sentimental piece. Worthless." Those words, spoken with such disdain, were, ironically, my salvation. Their greed was focused on the big numbers, the properties, the bank accounts. A worthless, old piece was invisible to them. The nurse shrugged and made a note on her clipboard. I felt a relief so intense my legs buckled. They took me to my new room. It was small, with a narrow bed, a metal locker, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. Mark put my small suitcase on the floor. "Well, Mom, here you are. Be well." He gave me a quick, dry kiss on the forehead. Sylvia didn't even touch me. I heard the door close behind me, and the soft click of the lock sounded like a shovelful of dirt on a coffin. I was alone. No, not entirely. On my wrist, Robert's faithful ticking continued to mark the time. But time for what? What was left to count? The first few days at Golden Sunset blurred into a gray, monotonous haze. Life there was governed by the sound of bells and an inflexible routine that allowed no deviation. Waking at 6 in the morning to the cold light from the hallway flooding the room, followed by a breakfast of stale bread and a thin, bitter liquid they called coffee. Afterward, we were all herded into a common room where an old television blared loud morning talk shows to an audience of vacant stares. Time, which had once been my own, filled with the small rituals of a life built with love, was now an enemy to be conquered, minute by minute. I tried to keep to myself, an empty shell on the shore of that common room. But shared loneliness has a strange gravity that pulls us toward one another. That's how I met Amelia, a woman with cotton white hair and eyes that had seen too many winters. She sat beside me, saying nothing for a long time, until she finally whispered, "You get used to the taste of the coffee. After a year, you barely notice it." Amelia became my reluctant guide in that purgatory. She was the one who explained that the fresh fruit served at Sunday lunch was a rare luxury, and that the extra piece of cake at the afternoon snack was reserved for those who received visitors. Visitors. That was the most valuable currency at Golden Sunset. A son who showed up with a package of cookies. A granddaughter who brought a new magazine. These were events that broke the monotony and conferred a temporary status on the lucky resident. I waited. With every creak of the front door, my heart would leap with foolish hope. Maybe Mark would come to apologize. Maybe he would bring my violets, which I had forgotten on the kitchen windowsill. But the days turned into a week, and then 2. The payphone in the hall, which I couldn't use for lack of a single quarter, never rang for me. The "for sale" sign in my garden was a tombstone for my hope. The reality of my financial situation hit me in a humiliating way. I began to develop a dry, persistent cough, irritated by the dusty, dry air of the place. Nurse Evans, during her nightly rounds, heard me coughing, and said, with her dispassionate efficiency, "The cough syrup we provide is the basic kind. There's a much better one that brings instant relief, but you would have to buy it. It's not on our list of covered medications." That night, in the darkness of my room, I rummaged through my small suitcase, searching for a forgotten bill, a lost coin in the lining of a purse. There was nothing. I, Helena, who had never had to worry about money, who had managed a comfortable home for 50 years, couldn't afford a simple bottle of cough syrup. The helplessness was a gag, suffocating me. I was completely at the mercy of this institution's cold charity and my son's cruelty. The abandonment was total, absolute, and it was then, with my chest burning from the cough and my soul burning from humiliation, that my eyes fell upon the golden glint on my wrist. The only thing I had left of Robert, the only thing of value I possessed in the world, and a terrible idea, a betrayal of my memory and my love, began to form in my mind. The cough became my constant companion, a raw and insistent presence, especially during the long, silent hours of the night. It was a physical, audible reminder of my abandonment, my complete powerlessness. During the day, I tried to stifle it with sips of water, but at night, in the darkness of my tiny room, I would surrender to it, shaking beneath the thin blanket, feeling each convulsion like a wave of despair. During one of these coughing fits, my hand flew to my chest, and my fingers brushed against the cool metal of the watch on my wrist. The contact calmed me for an instant, as it always did. The gold metal, always warm against my skin, seemed to hold Robert's residual heat. The soft ticking, which I could only hear in absolute silence, was the echo of his heart, a steady pulse that told me I was not entirely alone. The idea of selling it, once a fleeting, monstrous thought, now refused to leave. It was a profanation, a betrayal. I remembered an afternoon years ago when I found Robert sitting in his leather armchair, polishing the watch with a soft flannel cloth. He saw me watching and smiled. "This watch, Helena," he said, his voice full of a serene pride, "is proof that time well lived is worth more than all the gold in the world." To sell that symbol for a few bills to buy cough syrup felt like the ultimate sacrilege. But necessity is a cruel teacher. It teaches us to negotiate with our principles, to bend our most sacred loyalties. It was on one of those mornings, as I struggled for breath after a sleepless night, that a young staff member came in to empty the small trash can in my room. Her name was Sarah. She was different from the others. There was a deep weariness in her eyes, but also a spark of compassion that Nurse Evans and the others had long since lost. She heard me cough, a dry, painful sound, and her face tightened with genuine concern. "Are you okay, Mrs. Miller? That cough sounds awful." I just nodded, too weak to speak. Sarah finished her work in silence, and as she was leaving, she hesitated at the door. "Hang on a second," she whispered, and disappeared. Minutes later, she returned with a steaming plastic mug. "It's just hot water with some lemon from the staff kitchen. It's not allowed, but maybe it'll soothe your throat." That small act of clandestine kindness was the first drop of human warmth I had felt in weeks. My eyes filled with tears as I held the mug, the steam warming my face. "Thank you, dear," I managed to say. Seeing my vulnerability, Sarah sat on the edge of my bed, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Mrs. Miller, forgive me for prying, but don't you have anyone who could bring you some better medicine?" The question was gentle, but the answer was an open wound. I just shook my head. She sighed, looking at her own hands. "I know it's not my place, but when things get tight, some of the residents, they sell a little something they don't use anymore. A ring, a brooch. There's a very honest man downtown, a Mr. Abernathy. He has an antique shop and pays a fair price." Her words hung in the air, giving shape and legitimacy to my sinful thought. It was no longer a desperate idea. It was a path, a possibility. Shame and need waged a silent battle within me. Sell Robert's memory, or continue to wither away, voiceless and invisible. I looked at my wrist. The watch glowed softly in the dim light of the room. It was like choosing between breathing and remembering. With a choked voice, I looked at Sarah. Could you give me that man's address? Sarah jotted down the address on a piece of a paper napkin with a sputtering pen. Her handwriting rushed and a little crooked. It's on Chestnut Street, number 14. The shop is called Time and Treasures, she whispered, pressing the paper into my hand as if it were a state secret. Tomorrow is my day off. If you want, I can help you slip out without anyone noticing. Right at the shift change, I'll say I'm taking you out to the gate for some fresh air. The plan was simple, yet risky. To me, it felt like an escape, a journey into frightening, unknown territory. I spent the rest of the day with the napkin hidden in my sleeve, the crumpled paper feeling like it was burning my skin. Every time I looked at the watch on my wrist, a wave of nausea and guilt washed over me. I remembered the day Robert got it. It was for our 25th wedding anniversary. He came home beaming, with the small velvet box in his hands. "It's extravagant, Robert," I said, laughing, as I saw the impressive timepiece. "No, my love," he replied, fastening it to his wrist. "It's an investment in our history. Every tick is a second I'm grateful to have you." How could I now turn that symbol into pocket change for my own physical relief? The night was long. The ticking of the watch seemed louder than ever, each second a hammer of accusation against my heart. I was betraying his memory, auctioning off our history, but then the cough would return, tearing at my chest, and the memory of my powerlessness, of my invisibility in this place, gave me the dark strength of need. The next morning, Sarah appeared as promised. With stunning naturalness, she led me down the hall, waving at Nurse Evans. "I'm just taking Mrs. Miller to see the sun for a bit. The air in here isn't doing her any good." We stepped out into the cold, gray morning. Instead of stopping at the gate, Sarah guided me to the bus stop. "Here," she said, pressing a few coins into my hand, "for the fare. And this is for a coffee, if you can." It was her own money, I knew. Her generosity filled me with an even deeper shame. The bus ride was torture. The city outside was alive, pulsing, indifferent to my personal drama. I felt like a foreigner, scared and ashamed, clutching my purse to my chest. Chestnut Street was narrow and charming, lined with small shops. Time and Treasures had a dark wood facade and a dusty window display filled with objects that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door, which announced my arrival with the chime of a small bell. The interior was quiet, smelling of old wood and polish. Behind a glass counter, a gentleman with white hair and thin-rimmed glasses looked up from a book. This was Mr. Abernathy. His eyes were calm and observant. "Good morning, ma'am. How may I help you?" His voice was soft. With trembling hands, I unclasped the watch and slid it from my wrist. The skin underneath was pale, marked by the weight of the metal. I placed it on a blue velvet pad on the counter. The silence seemed to deepen. I'd like to know how much you would pay for this," I murmured. He picked up the watch with professional care, his gaze expert as he assessed the weight, the brand, the condition. I expected him to turn it over, name a low price, and end my agony. But he didn't. He picked up a small jeweler's loupe and examined the face. His expression, previously one of polite interest, began to change. His eyebrow rose. He adjusted his glasses, looked again, even closer. The air in the shop felt thicker. Finally, he lowered the loupe and looked up at me, his expression no longer that of a merchant, but of someone who had stumbled upon the impossible. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, his voice low and grave, "where did you get this piece?" Mr. Abernathy's question hung in the thick air of the shop, laden with a weight I couldn't comprehend. My first thought was sheer panic. Did he think I had stolen it? My appearance, my simple clothes, my trembling hand, it all screamed desperation. Perhaps he thought a woman like me couldn't possibly own such an object legitimately. I felt my face flush, a wave of shame and fear rising in my throat. It belonged to my late husband, I answered, my voice little more than a whisper. He wore it for almost 50 years. It was a gift he received. A long time ago, I clung to this half-truth, afraid that any more detail might incriminate me in his mind. He continued to study me, but the suspicion in his eyes was slowly replaced by something else, something that looked like a mixture of awe and shock. He pushed his glasses up onto his forehead and picked up the watch again, this time with the delicacy of someone holding a wounded bird. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and careful, as if he feared the words might break the moment's spell. "This isn't just an old watch. This is a Patek Philippe, reference 2499, manufactured around 1953. It is one of the rarest and most coveted timepieces in the world." The names and numbers meant nothing to me. They were just sounds. What struck me was the gravity in his face, the complete absence of any bargaining air. "It doesn't keep time very well," I murmured, as if to apologize, as if his assessment must be wrong. He shook his head, an almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "The internal mechanism is secondary in a piece like this. It's the history, the rarity, the artistry, on its own, in its current condition, this watch is worth." He paused, looking at me as if preparing me for the impact. "It's worth over $3 million. The world seemed to stop. $3 million. The number was so absurd, so stratospheric, that my brain refused to process it. I was standing there with counted coins for the bus fare, dreaming of a $20 bottle of cough syrup, and he was talking about millions. The first thing I felt was not joy, but anger. I thought he was mocking me, playing some kind of sadistic joke on a desperate old woman. "Are you making fun of me, sir?" I asked, my voice suddenly stronger, tinged with indignation. His eyes widened in surprise. "No, ma'am. Good heavens, no. I would never." He saw the turmoil of emotions on my face, the confusion, the pain, the disbelief. He seemed to understand that I was in a pit so deep that the light he was showing me was too bright to be real. "One moment," he said, his voice now softer, more compassionate. "Watches of this caliber, often custom-made for very special clients, frequently have unique features." He turned the piece in his hands, his expert fingers tracing the polished side. I held my breath. With a delicate gesture, he pressed something I had never noticed, a tiny part of the metal that blended seamlessly with the design. With an almost inaudible click, the polished metal caseback swung gently open on a minuscule hinge. My eyes expected to see the complex, delicate gears that Robert had so admired, but that's not what I saw. Instead of a mechanism, there was a hollow compartment, a secret space, and nestled inside, in a cutout of dark velvet, were not springs or rubies, but a small metal chip the size of a fingernail and a tiny roll of film, as fine as a spider's web. The world around me dissolved into a low, distant hum, the antique smell of the shop, the faint sound of traffic on the street, my own breathing. Everything seemed to recede to make way for the impossible sight of that secret compartment. I couldn't tear my eyes from the tiny chip and the roll of film. They were objects from a world that wasn't mine, a world of secrets and technology that didn't fit the simple, methodical man Robert had appeared to be. I felt dizzy, and my hand reached for the counter to steady myself. Mr. Abernathy, seeing my state, moved with surprising quickness. In an instant, he was beside me, guiding me to a small wooden chair in the corner. "Sit down, ma'am. Please, take a deep breath. I'll get you a glass of water." He returned with a glass in one hand, and the watch, now closed, in the other, which he placed on the counter as if it were a crown. The cool water helped anchor me back in reality. I don't understand," I whispered, looking at Mr. Abernathy's concerned face. Robert, he was a simple man, a retired bank manager. He didn't know about these things. "Sometimes," he said, his voice gentle and respectful, "the simplest people are the ones who keep the biggest secrets and the greatest treasures. Your husband, Helena, was clearly a man of great foresight and of great love for you." His words hit me with the force of a truth I was just beginning to grasp. This wasn't about money. It was about protection. Robert had somehow foreseen Mark's greed. He had sensed the danger I would be in and had quietly built a Noah's Ark for me, hidden inside the very object that best symbolized the time we spent together. The scale of his care, reaching beyond the grave, was so overwhelming that the tears I had held back since the funeral finally came, silent and hot. Mr. Abernathy waited with a monk's patience. When I had calmed myself, he cleared his throat. "The chip likely contains digital data. For that, we'll need a specialist. But the film, the microfilm, perhaps I can see what it is right here." He went to a drawer and pulled out a small loop and a pair of delicate tweezers. With the steady hand of a surgeon, he removed the tiny roll from the compartment. He slid it out of the small metal ring that held it and placed it under a high-intensity lamp on his workbench. I moved closer, holding my breath. Seen up close, the film was covered in minuscule lines, almost invisible to the naked eye. They were letters, words. Mr. Abernathy positioned the viewer over the film. The silence in the shop was so profound I could hear my own heart beating. "Is this his handwriting?" he asked, without taking his eyes from the viewer. I leaned in, and even with my vision tired from age, I immediately recognized the firm, slightly slanted strokes of Robert's hand. He began to read aloud, slowly, the words my husband had written in a format so small, it defied imagination. "My beloved Helena, if you are reading this, it means my greatest fear has come true, and I am no longer there to protect you." Robert's voice, read by a stranger, echoed in my soul. Our son, unfortunately, inherited his grandfather's intelligence, but not his honor. I have watched the greed in his eyes for years. For that reason, I have taken measures. Mr. Abernathy paused, adjusting the focus. What he knows of as our estate is merely a decoy, enough to keep him occupied. Our true fortune, our security for the rest of your life, is protected. The information is all on the digital device. He looked up from the film, his eyes meeting mine. He continues, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice now thick with emotion. The chip contains the account numbers, the policies, the investments, and it also contains, my love, one last message from me to you. My voice, my image, so that you never forget. I was paralyzed. Robert had left me a treasure map, but its most precious part, his last message, was locked away in that piece of metal. I was holding my husband's final will and testament in my hands, but I had no idea how to open that door. The revelation from the microfilm left me in a state of lucid shock. I walked out of Mr. Abernathy's shop with the watch back on my wrist, its weight now different, freighted not just with memory, but with a power and a purpose that frightened me. Mr. Abernathy refused to take any payment for his help. Consider it an honor to have been part of this story. Helena, he said, shaking my hand warmly, find a good lawyer, someone you can trust, and if I may offer a piece of advice, don't reveal a thing to anyone until you are safe. He recommended a trusted IT specialist, a young man named Daniel, who he said could access the chip's contents discreetly. Before I left, he handed me an envelope with $500, an advance against the value of the piece for your immediate needs. You can pay me back when you're able. That act of pure kindness from a stranger, in contrast to the cruelty of my own son, was so overwhelming I could barely thank him. I returned to Golden Sunset feeling like a spy in enemy territory. Sarah was waiting for me at the gate, her eyes filled with anxiety. "Did you manage, Mrs. Miller?" she whispered. I just nodded, unable to form a lie or to tell a truth so unbelievable. I gave her half the money Mr. Abernathy had given me. "For you. For the bus fare. The coffee. For everything." She protested, but I insisted. That night, for the first time in weeks, I bought the expensive cough syrup from the small in-house pharmacy, and I also bought a chocolate bar, a small luxury that felt like an act of rebellion. As I savored the sweet in the solitude of my room, a plan began to take shape. The first phase was discretion. I had to continue being the frail, abandoned widow. Any change in my behavior, any sign that I had resources, would alert Mark. The next challenge was contacting the technician, Daniel. Using the hall phone was impossible. Calls were monitored by the front desk. The solution, once again, came in the form of Sarah. During her morning cleaning, I explained, in vague terms, that I needed to make an important, private call. I asked if she would call Daniel from her own cell phone on her day off and pass along a message from me to set up a meeting. She did. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at a coffee shop downtown. My excuse for leaving would be the same: getting some fresh air. The week of waiting was torture. I lived in a state of constant alert, watching everyone and everything, afraid my eyes would betray me, that some flicker of hope would reveal my secret. During that time, Mark's cruelty reached a new level. I learned from Amelia, whose niece worked at a real estate agency, that a sold sign had been placed in front of my house. My son hadn't just put it up for sale, he had liquidated it, quickly, to turn memories into cash. The news wounded me deeply, but it also hardened my resolve. Meanwhile, I began to overhear fragments of conversations between the nurses. They were talking about me, about how Mrs. Miller's son called the administration frequently. He wasn't asking about my health. He was asking about my mental state. He's worried about her confusion, Nurse Evans told a colleague. He asked if she's been saying things that don't make sense, if she seems lucid. Said he's consulting with lawyers about a possible conservatorship. His plan was clear: declare me mentally incompetent, take legal control of anything that remained, and ensure that even if some forgotten asset surfaced, I wouldn't be able to claim it. He wasn't just abandoning me. He was building a legal cage around me. The urgency of accessing the chip's contents became desperate. It was no longer just about recovering what was mine. It was a race against time to save my own identity, my sanity in the eyes of the law, before my son could erase it forever. Saturday arrived with a fine, persistent rain that left the world outside my window, gray and melancholic. It was the day of my meeting with Daniel. Miss Sarah, true to her promise, helped me slip out again under the pretense of a short walk. Every step away from Golden Sunset felt like an act of defiance. At the cafe, a small, cozy place that smelled of roasted beans, I found Daniel. He was surprisingly young, with thick-rimmed glasses and an air of someone more comfortable with machines than with people. He recognized me from Sarah's description and greeted me with a shy nod. I explained the situation as simply as I could, without going into the details of my personal life. I just said the watch was an heirloom and that the chip contained important family information. He listened attentively, asking no prying questions. I took off the watch and handed it to him. With tools that looked like they belonged in a spy movie, he opened the secret compartment and removed the tiny chip with a pair of tweezers. He connected it to a device plugged into his laptop and began to type. I watched, my heart in my throat, every click of the keyboard sounding like a drumbeat. His face was impassive, focused on the screen. The minutes dragged on. The encryption is old, but it's very strong," he murmured to himself. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped typing and turned to me. "I'm in," he said. "I've opened the files." He turned the laptop screen toward me. What I saw took my breath away. There were spreadsheets, documents, statements, lists of stocks in multinational corporations, deeds to properties in other countries, multi-million-dollar life insurance policies, and, most shockingly, statements from bank accounts in Geneva and the Cayman Islands, with balances that had so many zeros I could hardly count them. The fortune Robert had built in silence was unimaginable, a financial empire hidden beneath the facade of a quiet suburban life. But that's not what made me cry. It was the last file Daniel opened. A video icon appeared on the screen. "The message Mr. Abernathy mentioned," he said softly. He clicked it, and then there he was, Robert, sitting in his leather armchair, the same one where I had found him so many times reading the newspaper. He looked a little thinner, his voice a little more tired, but his smile was the same. "My Helena," he began, and hearing his voice again was like a sweet stab to the heart. "If you're seeing this, it means the watch has fulfilled its final mission. Forgive me for keeping this secret, but I had to be sure you would be safe. Our son is a good man at heart, I hope, but money blinds him. I couldn't take the risk." He paused, his eyes welling up. "Live, my love. Live the life we always dreamed of. Travel, see the world, build something good, something that lasts. All this money means nothing without a purpose. And never forget, not for 1 second, that my love for you is the only fortune that truly matters. I love you, always." The video ended. I was sobbing, tears falling onto my hands. Daniel, embarrassed but kind, passed me a napkin. He saved all the files onto a small flash drive and handed it to me. "It's all here, Mrs. Miller. Account numbers, passwords, documents, the video, everything." I thanked him, paid for his services with the money from Mr. Abernathy, and walked out of the cafe, back into the rain. The flash drive in my pocket felt like it weighed a ton. I had the keys to the kingdom. But how could I, a woman trapped in a nursing home with no access to a phone or a computer, use those keys? How could I call a bank in Geneva? Robert's message gave me a purpose, but the reality of my situation was an insurmountable wall, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that while I was planning how to use this fortune for good, my son and daughter-in-law were out there, moving heaven and earth to find any trace of it. The treasure hunt they thought they were leading was about to take a turn they could never imagine. Returning to the gray routine of golden sunset after glimpsing a universe of possibilities was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The flash drive, hidden in the lining of my purse, was a burning secret. I would hold it in my hands during the long nights, feeling the cool plastic, and try to devise a plan. I had the proof, the wealth, Robert's final wish, but I was physically trapped. My communications were monitored, and my son was actively working to have me legally nullified. Every day that passed was a risk. Confirmation that I was in a race against time came from an unexpected source. Amelia, my quiet friend, had a visit from her niece, the young woman from the real estate agency. After the visit, Amelia came to sit beside me, her face more worried than usual. "Helena," she began in a low voice, "my niece told me something strange. Your son's wife, Sylvia, went to her agency." My heart skipped a beat. "What for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She wasn't looking to buy or sell," Amelia continued. "She wanted to hire their asset search services. She said her father-in-law was a very private man, and they suspected there might be properties or investments that weren't in the official records. She wanted the agency to do a complete sweep, deed offices, business registries, everything. She was willing to pay very well for it. Their greed was insatiable. Not content with what they had already stolen, they were sniffing for more. They were like sharks that smell blood in the water. The news terrified me, but it also gave me a new sense of urgency. They were looking in the wrong place, in local records, but it was only a matter of time before their search grew more sophisticated. I had to act, and fast. The biggest obstacle was practical. How to contact international lawyers and bankers from inside a nursing home. I couldn't ask Sarah to do it. It would be too great and dangerous a burden for her. The solution had to come from within the system that imprisoned me. My chance came during the monthly medical evaluation, conducted by a doctor who came in from outside. Dr. Peterson was a middle-aged man with a weary air but with eyes that still showed a spark of genuine interest in his patients. During my consultation, after he had listened to my lungs and taken my blood pressure, I gathered my courage. "Doctor," I began, my voice deliberately weak and a little confused. "I've been so forgetful lately. My late husband always told me that if anything happened to him, I should see a lawyer he knew. A very good man. But I can't quite remember the name. I think it was something like Dr. Reed. Do you happen to know a family lawyer by that name?" The lie was risky, but it was the only one I could think of. Dr. Peterson frowned. "Reed? Yes, I know a Charles Reed. He's one of the best attorneys in the city. Very well respected. Why do you ask, Helena?" "Oh, my son is so busy," I continued, letting a tear roll down my cheek. "He's taking care of everything. But I just wanted to talk to this Dr. Reed to make sure everything Robert planned is being done correctly. A last wish, you know?" The doctor looked at me with compassion. He saw before him what Mark's narrative wanted him to see. A confused, sentimental old woman. "Look," he said, "I can't get involved in family matters, but I can do one thing. I'll leave his card here with Nurse Evans and suggest that it would be good for your emotional state to have this conversation. It helps with closure." It was exactly what I wanted. By placing the request in the doctor's hands, I legitimized it. If the nursing home's administration allowed the visit, Mark couldn't object without seeming like the cruel son who was preventing his mother from fulfilling a last wish. The bait was set. Now, I could only pray that the fish would bite, and that Dr. Reed was the right man for the monumental task I was about to give him. The wait for a response to my gambit was excruciating. For 3 days, I watched Nurse Evans's every move, trying to decipher from her impassive expression whether Dr. Peterson had kept his promise. Finally, on Wednesday, she approached me in the hallway, her voice laden with an efficiency that barely concealed her irritation. "Helena, your son will be here tomorrow afternoon. He's been informed of your wish to consult an attorney, a Dr. Reed. He has agreed to you receiving the visit. The attorney will come on Friday." The word "agreed" told me everything. Mark had been cornered. To deny such a simple request, validated by a doctor, would make him look like the villain. He was allowing it, confident that the confused, senile widow would only speak nonsense, and that the lawyer, seeing my state, would simply perform a formality and leave. He underestimated the woman his greed had created. Mark's visit was tense. He came alone, arrogance oozing from every pore. "Mom, what's this about a lawyer?" he asked, sitting on the edge of my bed, his tone that of an adult, scolding a stubborn child. "You know I'm taking care of everything. You don't need to bother people." I maintained my performance. I looked at him with teary eyes, my voice trembling. "It's just for my own peace of mind, son. To be sure your father's wishes are being honored. I don't doubt you, dear. It's just a personal thing." My apparent fragility disarmed him. He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Fine, Mom. Have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you it's a waste of time and money." He left, leaving behind the scent of his expensive cologne and a trail of condescension. On Friday, my heart felt like it would beat out of my chest. I was led to a small meeting room, a windowless space with a formica table and 2 chairs. Dr. Charles Reed was already there. He was a man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that conveyed calm and intelligence. He stood as I entered and shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Miller, it's a pleasure. Dr. Peterson told me about you." I began by repeating the same story I told the doctor, about my husband's last wish. Dr. Reed listened patiently, without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me kindly. "I understand. And how can I help you find that peace of mind?" This was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath. "Doctor," I said, and my voice changed. The frailty vanished, replaced by a firmness that surprised us both. "The story I just told you is a lie. The truth is far more complicated." I took the flash drive from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. "My son has robbed me, Doctor. He took everything and put me in this place, to wither away. He's trying to have me declared legally incompetent, but my husband, foreseeing this, left me this." I told him the entire story, from Robert's death to the secret compartment in the watch. With every word, I saw Dr. Reed's expression shift from professional politeness to surprise, and from surprise to an intense, focused concentration. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming softly on the table. He picked up the flash drive. "May I?" He plugged it into his laptop and, for nearly an hour, navigated the files, his eyes widening slightly at the account balances, his jaw tightening as he watched Robert's video. When he was done, he closed the laptop and looked at me. The gentle lawyer was gone. In his place was a warrior. "Helena," he said, his voice vibrating with a contained indignation, "what your son has done is not just immoral, it's criminal. And we are going to get back not only what is rightfully yours, but also your dignity and your freedom. As of today, you are no longer alone." In that windowless room, an alliance was forged. The battle for my life was about to truly begin. The following weeks were a whirlwind of secret activity, orchestrated with military precision by Dr. Fuan Reed. He assembled a small, trusted team, including international finance law experts and an attorney fluent in German to handle the Swiss banks, while I continued my monotonous routine at Golden Sunset, pretending to be the same forgotten widow. My legal army on the outside was moving mountains. The complexity of accessing the accounts was immense. It required powers of attorney, proof of life, documents I didn't possess. Every step was an obstacle, but Robert's video message, authenticated by voice and image analysis experts, became our master key, proving his unequivocal intent to leave me as the sole beneficiary. Dr. Reed visited me weekly, disguised as a concerned family friend. In these meetings, he would update me on the progress and bring me documents to sign, hidden inside crossword puzzle magazines. The final confirmation, the transfer of control over Robert's entire financial empire to my name, came on a Thursday morning via a coded message. Dr. Reed sent me a bouquet of 12 yellow roses with a card that read, "Remembering your garden fondly, the flowers are ready for picking." It was our signal. I was no longer a prisoner. I was the queen on a chessboard, ready to call checkmate. The first move was buying Golden Sunset Senior Living. Dr. Reed, through one of his holding companies, made an irresistible offer to the owner, who was more than happy to be rid of the decaying business. Within 24 hours, I became the owner of my own prison. The moment of truth was scheduled for the following Monday. I summoned Mark and Sylvia for a family meeting at Dr. Reed's office, under the pretext of discussing the terms of my conservatorship. They arrived radiating self-confidence. Sylvia wearing a fur coat I suspected was bought with the money from the sale of my house. Their arrogance was palpable. They walked into the conference room and stopped dead. I wasn't sitting in a chair, hunched and afraid. I was standing next to Dr. Reed, wearing an elegant suit he had arranged for, my hair styled, my makeup subtle. I didn't look like a woman on the verge of senility. I looked like the chairwoman of the board. "Mom, what is this?" Mark stammered, confusion and anger warring on his face. "Sit down, Mark. Sit down, Sylvia," I said, my voice calm and steady. "We have a lot to talk about." What followed was the systematic demolition of their world. Dr. Reed, with surgical precision, presented the evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and illegal transfer of assets. He showed the statements from the accounts they had drained, and then he showed the statements from the accounts they never knew existed. I watched the color drain from Sylvia's face. I saw Mark's chin tremble. They stared at the numbers as if they were from another planet. "But how?" Mark whispered. It was my cue. "Your father was always a man of foresight," I said. And then Dr. Reed pressed a button, and the large screen on the conference room wall lit up. And there was Robert, in his leather armchair, telling them in his own voice about his disappointment, about their greed, but above all, about the love for me that drove him to protect me. The tears that streamed down my face weren't of sadness, but of a deep catharsis, of poetic justice. My husband was there with me, fighting my final battle. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Mark and Sylvia were shattered, not by remorse, I realized, but by the magnitude of the fortune they had lost. "You didn't just steal my money," I said, my voice echoing in the silence. "You stole my memories, my dignity, my time, the money. I can get back. The rest, you'll have to settle with your own conscience. And with the law." Dr. Reed placed one last folder on the table. "These are the criminal complaints we will be filing tomorrow, unless all misappropriated assets are returned within 72 hours. Checkmate." A month after that meeting, I stood at the entrance of the former Golden Sunset Senior Living. The faded sign was gone. In its place, a new one in elegant script read, "The Helena and Robert Foundation, Senior Residence." The smell of disinfectant had been replaced with that of fresh paint and new wood. I hired a team of architects and designers to transform the place from top to bottom. The dark hallways were now lit by large windows, the worn floors replaced with soft carpeting, and the rooms, once cells of loneliness, were converted into comfortable, personalized suites. The brick wall that had been the only view from my old window was demolished, making way for a lush garden filled with the violets I loved so much. Amelia and the other residents, who became my first guests of honor, strolled through the garden, their once vacant faces now lit with genuine smiles. Sarah, the kind-hearted young staffer, was now the chief administrator, with a fair salary and a mission to ensure every resident was treated with the dignity and care they deserved. Mark and Sylvia, faced with financial ruin and public disgrace, returned every cent. My home was bought back, though I decided not to live there again. I turned it into a support center for families caring for the elderly, a place of respite and learning. My son tried to contact me a few times, sending letters full of belated remorse. I didn't answer them. Forgiveness is a long and complex road, and I wasn't ready to walk it yet. Perhaps one day. For now, distance was my peace. The real victory, I discovered, was not in the vastness of my fortune, but in the freedom to give it a purpose. Robert's message echoed in my mind. Build something good, something that lasts. And that's what I was doing. I traveled, as he wished, but my trips were to see the best models of elder care around the world, bringing ideas back to our foundation. I was no longer alone. I had a new family, a community built on respect and kindness. My life, which had seemed to end with Robert's loss, had in fact just begun a new chapter. He had given me not only the means to survive, but a mission to live fully. The old gold watch is still on my wrist. Its ticking is no longer the sound of a countdown to the end, but the steady, faithful beat of a new beginning. It doesn't just mark the passing hours, it marks the time I have left to make a difference. Robert taught me that time well lived is the greatest treasure. Now, I understand that the true value of that treasure lies